In the shadowed halls of Ravensholm Palace, a secret has been buried for decades, one that could shatter the very foundation of the crown. When the beloved Queen Victoria Ashworth's private solicitor arrives at the palace gates clutching a leather-bound document that was never meant to see daylight, the royal family discovers that death doesn't always silence the most powerful secrets. Some revelations are worth more than crowns, and some truths can topple kingdoms. What happens when a queen's final act of love becomes the ultimate betrayal of tradition? The autumn rain hammered against the tall windows of Ravensholm Palace, each droplet seeming to echo the somber mood that had settled over the ancient stone walls. 3 months had passed since Queen Victoria Ashworth had drawn her final breath, yet the palace still felt hollow, as if her spirit lingered in every corridor, every chamber, every carefully tended garden where she had once walked with such grace and purpose. Princess Catherine Ashworth Manning stood before the mirror in her private dressing room, adjusting the simple black pearl necklace that had become her daily armor against grief. At 38, she possessed the kind of understated elegance that had made her beloved by the people. Warm brown eyes that crinkled when she smiled, auburn hair that caught the light just so, and a genuine warmth that seemed to radiate from within. She had been the Queen's favorite, though such favoritism was never spoken aloud in the rigid world of royal protocol. The morning light struggled through the heavy clouds, casting everything in muted grays and silvers. Catherine had grown accustomed to these colorless days. Since her grandmother's passing, the world had seemed drained of its vibrancy, as if someone had turned down the saturation on life itself. She moved through her daily responsibilities with practiced efficiency. Charity meetings, public appearances, ribbon cuttings. But the joy she once found in serving others had dimmed considerably. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Your Highness," came the gentle voice of Margaret, her lady-in-waiting. "There's a gentleman here to see you. He says it's regarding Her late Majesty's private affairs." Catherine's brow furrowed slightly. The Queen's will had been read months ago, a straightforward document that had surprised no one. The crown and its vast holdings had passed to King Charles, her uncle, as expected. The personal effects had been distributed according to royal tradition, with most of the Queen's famous jewelry collection going to Queen Consort Camilla, who had worn the pieces to several recent state functions with what many observers noted was particular satisfaction. "Did he give his name?" Catherine asked, turning from the mirror.
Mr.
"Edmund Whitmore, Your Highness. He claims to have been Her late Majesty's private solicitor for many years." The name meant nothing to Catherine, which was unusual. She had been intimately involved in her grandmother's life, especially in those final years when the Queen had grown more dependent on family for companionship and comfort. Catherine had been present for countless meetings with advisors, lawyers, and staff members. The fact that this Mr. Whitmore was completely unfamiliar struck her as odd. "Very well. Have him shown to the blue drawing room. I'll be down presently." As Margaret departed, Catherine took one final look in the mirror. Something about this unexpected visitor unsettled her, though she couldn't quite identify why. Perhaps it was simply that any disruption to the established morning routine felt jarring. Or perhaps it was the way Margaret had emphasized the word private when mentioning the Queen's affairs. The blue drawing room had always been one of Catherine's favorite spaces in the palace. Unlike the grand staterooms with their overwhelming gilt and crystal, this chamber struck a balance between royal grandeur and intimate comfort. Deep sapphire walls were adorned with portraits of previous monarchs, while comfortable seating arrangements invited conversation rather than formal presentation. The Queen had often entertained close friends and family here, away from the prying eyes of court officials and protocol officers. Mr. Edmund Whitmore rose as Catherine entered, and she was immediately struck by his appearance. He was perhaps 70 years old, with silver hair that had been carefully combed but showed signs of recent stress. His suit was well-tailored but not ostentatious, speaking of comfortable means rather than great wealth. Most notably, his eyes held a weight of knowledge that seemed almost burdensome. "Your Royal Highness," he said, offering a respectful bow. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I realize this visit is unexpected. Please, sit." Catherine gestured toward the chairs arranged near the fireplace. "Margaret mentioned you were Her late Majesty's private solicitor." "I must confess, I don't recall my grandmother mentioning you." A shadow of something, was it sadness, crossed Whitmore's face. "That would be by design, Your Highness. Queen Victoria was most particular that my services remain completely confidential. I handled certain personal matters that she preferred to keep separate from the Crown's official legal affairs." Catherine settled into her chair, her curiosity now fully engaged. "What sort of personal matters?" Whitmore reached into a worn leather briefcase at his feet and withdrew a thick envelope sealed with deep red wax. The seal bore not the official royal coat of arms, but rather a simple monogram, V.A. Victoria Ashworth. 3 weeks before her passing, Her late Majesty summoned me to her private chambers. She was quite weak by then, but her mind was as sharp as ever. She entrusted me with this document, along with very specific instructions about when and to whom it should be delivered. He held out the envelope, but Catherine found herself hesitant to take it. Something in Whitmore's manner suggested that whatever lay within would change everything, and she had grown comfortable with the predictable rhythms of grief and routine. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "A second will, Your Highness. One that was never filed with the official court records, never seen by the Royal Legal Council, and known only to Queen Victoria herself until she shared its contents with me." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything Catherine thought she knew about her grandmother's final wishes. The official will had been so conventional, so perfectly in line with centuries of royal tradition. The idea that there had been another document hidden away like some Gothic novel secret seemed almost absurd. But why? Catherine's voice was barely above a whisper. Why would she create a separate will? Whitmore's expression grew grave. "Because, Your Highness, Queen Victoria believed that her official will, crafted under the guidance of the Crown's legal advisors, did not fully reflect her personal wishes. This document represents her true intentions regarding her most precious personal possessions, particularly her jewelry collection." Catherine's heart began to beat faster. The Queen's jewelry collection was legendary. Pieces accumulated over centuries, some dating back to the Tudor dynasty. The official will had bequeathed the entire collection to Queen Consort Camilla, a decision that had surprised many given the collection's historical significance and the fact that Catherine had always been seen as the Queen's closest confidant among the younger generation. "She wanted you to have them," Whitmore continued, his voice gentle but firm. "All of them. Every piece. From the crown diamonds to the simple gold locket she wore as a young princess. She felt that you, more than anyone else, understood their true value, not as symbols of wealth or status, but as tangible connections to the women who had worn them before." Catherine stared at the envelope in Whitmore's outstretched hand, her mind racing. If what he was saying was true, then the jewelry collection currently residing in Queen Camilla's private vault legally belonged to her. But more than that, it meant her grandmother had deliberately chosen to subvert royal tradition to make a statement about who she truly trusted with the family's most intimate treasures. "Take it," Whitmore urged softly. "Read it for yourself." Her late Majesty was quite thorough in her explanations. With trembling fingers, Catherine accepted the envelope. The wax seal cracked easily, as if it had been waiting all these months for this moment. Inside was a handwritten document in the Queen's familiar script, still strong despite her age. The heading was simple but devastating in its implications. "The personal will and testament of Victoria Ashworth, by the grace of God, Queen." As Catherine began to read, her grandmother's voice seemed to echo from the pages. "My dearest Catherine, if you are reading this, then Mr. Whitmore has faithfully executed his promise to me. I write these words with a heavy heart, knowing that their revelation will likely cause great turmoil within our family. However, I have come to believe that sometimes disruption is necessary to preserve what truly matters." Catherine's hands shook slightly as she continued reading. The document was lengthy and detailed, but its central message was clear. Queen Victoria had never intended for her jewelry collection to pass to Camilla. Instead, she had viewed Catherine as the rightful heir to pieces that represented not just monetary value but centuries of feminine strength, wisdom, and resilience. You may wonder why I chose to create this separate document rather than simply changing my official will. The truth is that I attempted to do so on several occasions, but was met with significant resistance from legal advisors who felt that tradition demanded the collection pass to the current Queen Consort. They reminded me repeatedly of precedent, of expectations, of what would be proper. Catherine paused in her reading, remembering several occasions when she had noticed her grandmother seemed frustrated after meetings with palace lawyers. She had assumed it was simply the natural irritation of an elderly woman dealing with complex legal matters, but now she wondered if there had been specific battles being fought behind closed doors. But precedent, the Queen's written words continued, should not supersede love, understanding, and genuine appreciation. Camilla is a good woman who has made Charles happy, and for that I am grateful. However, she views these pieces primarily as symbols of status and position. You, my dear Catherine, see them as I do, as sacred trusts, as connections to the remarkable women who shaped our family's destiny. The document went on to detail specific pieces and their histories: the diamond parure that had belonged to Queen Charlotte, the sapphire suite commissioned for Queen Victoria's namesake, the first Queen Victoria, the pearl choker that had been worn by Queen Mary during World War II as a symbol of steadfast hope. Each piece was described not just by its appearance and value, but by its emotional significance and the circumstances under which previous queens had worn it. I have instructed Mr. Whitmore to ensure this document meets all legal requirements for validity. It is my sincere hope that this revelation will be handled with discretion and wisdom. I do not wish to cause unnecessary pain to Camilla, but I cannot allow pieces that represent our family's feminine heritage to be treated as mere accessories. As Catherine neared the end of the document, she found perhaps the most shocking revelation of all. Her grandmother had not acted alone in this deception. Princess Anne, Catherine's aunt, had been aware of the secret will and had helped facilitate several private meetings between the Queen and Mr. Whitmore. More surprisingly, King Charles himself had been told of his mother's true wishes shortly before her death, though he had been sworn to secrecy until the document was officially presented. Charles understands my reasoning, though he fears the controversy this may cause. I have asked him to support your claim when the time comes, as I believe he will recognize the wisdom in ensuring these treasures remain with someone who truly comprehends their significance. Catherine set down the document, her mind reeling. In the span of 20 minutes, her understanding of her family's dynamics had been completely upended. Her grandmother, the woman she had thought she knew so intimately, had been orchestrating an elaborate deception for months before her death. More shocking still, other family members had been complicit in keeping this secret. This is extraordinary, she said finally, looking up at Whitmore, who had remained patiently silent during her reading. But surely the legal implications are enormous. How can a secret will simply override the official document that was filed and probated? Whitmore nodded grimly. Indeed, Your Highness. The situation is virtually unprecedented in royal legal history. However, I have spent considerable time researching the matter, and I believe the Queen's personal effects, as distinct from crown property, were hers to bequeath as she saw fit. The challenge will be proving the document's authenticity and demonstrating that it represents her true final wishes. Catherine stood and walked to one of the tall windows, gazing out at the rain-soaked gardens where she had spent countless hours walking with her grandmother. Those conversations now took on new meaning. How many times had the Queen been hinting at this secret? How many seemingly casual comments about jewelry, about family legacy, about Catherine's natural understanding of royal history had actually been preparation for this moment? What happens now? She asked without turning around. That depends entirely on what you wish to do, Your Highness. You could choose to let this document remain secret, to avoid the controversy its revelation would certainly cause. Or you could choose to honor Queen Victoria's wishes and pursue your legal right to the collection. Catherine closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. Either choice would have profound consequences. Remaining silent would mean betraying her grandmother's trust and allowing pieces of immeasurable historical significance to remain with someone who, according to the Queen's own words, did not fully appreciate their meaning. But pressing the claim would likely tear the royal family apart, creating exactly the kind of public spectacle that the monarchy worked so hard to avoid. How much time do I have to decide? Legally, there are statutes of limitations that apply to will contests. But given the unique circumstances and the fact that the secret document was deliberately withheld until now, I believe you have several months to make your decision. However, Whitmore paused delicately. I should mention that Queen Consort Camilla has already begun making plans to loan several of the most significant pieces to museums. Once those arrangements are finalized, unwinding them would become considerably more complex. This new information sent a chill through Catherine. The idea of her grandmother's most precious pieces being treated as museum curiosities rather than living parts of royal heritage would have horrified the Queen. Catherine remembered her grandmother's strong feelings about keeping the jewelry collection accessible and meaningful rather than locked away as historical artifacts. You mentioned that my Uncle Charles knows about this document? He does, Your Highness, though our conversation was necessarily brief given Queen Victoria's failing health at the time. He seemed conflicted, understanding his mother's reasoning, but concerned about the potential consequences. Catherine returned to her chair, her mind working through the implications. If Charles was aware of their mother's true wishes, but had allowed the official will to proceed unchallenged, his position was deeply complicated. As the new king, he had a duty to maintain family harmony and avoid scandal, but he also had a responsibility to honor his mother's genuine desires. The rain had intensified, creating a steady drumbeat against the windows that seemed to echo the urgency of the decision before her. Catherine found herself thinking about all the times she had admired pieces from the collection when her grandmother wore them to state functions. The way the Queen's eyes had lit up when she described the history behind each piece, the stories of the women who had worn them during moments of triumph and tragedy. Mr. Whitmore, she said finally, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you believe this is what my grandmother truly wanted? Or could this have been the confused wish of an elderly woman facing her mortality? Whitmore met her gaze steadily. Your Highness, I had the privilege of serving Queen Victoria for nearly 15 years in various capacities. I can say with absolute certainty that I never encountered a woman more mentally acute or more deliberate in her decisions. When she summoned me to create this document, she was weak in body but entirely clear in mind and purpose. She spent hours explaining her reasoning, her hopes, and her fears about what would happen to the collection after her death. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. She also asked me to tell you something that she couldn't bring herself to write in the document. She said that watching you grow from a young girl into the woman you've become has been one of the greatest joys of her reign. She believes you possess the wisdom, grace, and genuine love for our family's history that makes you the natural guardian of these treasures. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes. Even from beyond the grave, her grandmother's love and confidence in her felt overwhelming. But with that love came an enormous burden of responsibility. What would you advise me to do? She asked quietly. Whitmore shook his head gently. That decision must be entirely yours, Your Highness. I can provide legal counsel and support whatever choice you make, but I cannot and will not attempt to influence your decision. I will say this, however. Queen Victoria spent her final weeks worrying about this moment, about whether she had done the right thing in placing this burden on your shoulders. She hoped that when the time came, you would find the courage to honor her wishes, but she also wanted you to know that she would understand if you chose a different path. Catherine stood up, still holding the precious document. The weight of it seemed disproportionate to its physical mass, as if it contained not just words on paper, but the hopes, fears, and love of a dying queen. I need time to think, she said, and I need to speak with some people I trust. Of course, Your Highness. I'll leave my contact information with your private secretary. Please know that I am entirely at your disposal, whatever you decide. As Whitmore gathered his belongings and prepared to leave, Catherine found herself studying his face. This man had carried her grandmother's secret for months, had watched the royal family navigate the aftermath of the Queen's death, knowing that everything they believed about her final wishes was incomplete. The burden must have been enormous. Mr. Whitmore, she called as he reached the door. Thank you for keeping her secret, for honoring her trust, and for giving me the choice she wanted me to have. He smiled sadly. She was a remarkable woman, Your Highness. Whatever you decide, I believe she would be proud of the thoughtfulness you're bringing to this decision. After he left, Catherine remained alone in the blue drawing room. The secret was still clutched in her hands. Outside, the autumn storm continued to rage, but inside the warm chambers, she felt as if she were standing at the center of a different kind of tempest, one that could reshape her family's future in ways she was only beginning to understand. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed 11 times, marking not just the late morning hour, but what felt like the end of one chapter of Catherine's life and the beginning of another, far more complicated one. As she carefully folded the document and slipped it into her handbag, she realized that her quiet period of mourning had just come to an abrupt end. Now came the far more difficult task of deciding how to honor both her grandmother's memory and her family's future. The rain against the windows seemed to whisper questions that she wasn't yet ready to answer. Was she strong enough to challenge centuries of royal tradition? Could she risk tearing her family apart for the sake of jewelry, no matter how precious? And perhaps most importantly, what would her beloved grandmother truly want her to do if she could see the full consequences of the choice she had left behind? The meeting that would change everything took place in Edmund Whitmore's private office, a distinguished Georgian townhouse in Lincoln's Inn that spoke of old money and older traditions. Catherine arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, accompanied by Margaret, both women understanding that they were about to cross a line from which there could be no return. Whitmore's office reflected decades of handling sensitive legal matters for Britain's most prominent families. The walls were lined with leather-bound volumes of legal precedents, while discreet portraits of previous senior partners gazed down from their gilded frames. The atmosphere was one of absolute confidentiality and unshakable discretion. Your Royal Highness, Lady Thornbury. Whitmore rose from behind his mahogany desk as they were shown in. Thank you for coming. I trust you understand the gravity of what we're about to undertake. Margaret wasted no time with pleasantries. Mr. Whitmore, I've reviewed the document you provided to Princess Catherine, and I need to understand every aspect of its creation. Walk me through the process from the beginning. For the next hour, Whitmore provided a detailed account of his interactions with Queen Victoria during her final months. He had kept meticulous records of their meetings, including dates, times, witnesses present, and the Queen's apparent mental state during each session. Margaret took careful notes, occasionally asking pointed questions about specific legal requirements or procedural details. The key issue, Margaret explained as Whitmore concluded his account, will be proving that the Queen had both the mental capacity and the legal authority to create this document. Her age and declining health will certainly be used to challenge its validity, which is why I was so careful to document everything, Whitmore replied, withdrawing a thick file from his desk drawer. I have medical assessments from the Queen's personal physician confirming her mental acuity during the relevant period, as well as statements from Princess Anne and 2 of the Queen's private secretaries who witnessed her lucid discussions about the jewelry collection. Catherine had been quietly listening to the technical discussion, but now she leaned forward with concern. What about the authentication process Margaret mentioned? How do we prove the document is genuine? Whitmore smiled slightly. I anticipated that question as well. The paper is from the Queen's personal stationery, which has specific watermarks and security features. The ink was from her favorite fountain pen, which she used exclusively for important documents. Most importantly, I have video recordings of our sessions. Both Catherine and Margaret stared at him in surprise. Video recordings? Margaret asked, with her late Majesty's full knowledge and consent, of course. She actually suggested it herself, saying that if the document's validity were ever questioned, visual evidence of her creating it would be invaluable. The recordings show her writing key passages of the will in her own hand, discussing her reasoning and explicitly stating her intentions regarding the jewelry collection. Catherine felt a surge of admiration for her grandmother's strategic thinking. Even in her final weeks, she had been planning several moves ahead, anticipating every possible challenge to her wishes. May we see these recordings? Margaret asked. Whitmore moved to a secured cabinet and withdrew a locked metal case. Inside were several digital storage devices, each labeled with dates and brief descriptions. He selected one marked Final Session, Victoria's Will Completion, and inserted it into a discrete viewing system. The image that appeared on the screen was heartbreaking and inspiring in equal measure. Queen Victoria, clearly frail but mentally alert, sat at her private desk wearing a simple blue dress and her favorite pearl necklace. Her voice was weak but determined as she spoke directly to the camera. I am creating this document of my own free will, with full understanding of its implications. The jewelry collection that has been in our family for generations deserves to be preserved and protected by someone who truly understands its significance. My granddaughter Catherine has demonstrated throughout her life the wisdom, grace, and genuine appreciation for our family's history that makes her the ideal guardian for these precious pieces. The Queen paused in her speech to write several lines in her distinctive handwriting, the camera capturing every stroke of her pen. I have been advised by the Crown's legal counsel that tradition requires these pieces to pass to the current Queen Consort, but tradition should not supersede love, understanding, and genuine stewardship. These jewels tell the story of the remarkable women who came before us, and they deserve to be cared for by someone who honors that legacy. Catherine found herself wiping away tears as she watched her grandmother's final performance, because that's what it was, a carefully orchestrated presentation designed to eliminate any possible doubt about her intentions or mental state. The recording continued for another 20 minutes, with the Queen methodically explaining her reasoning for each decision, referencing specific pieces in their histories, and repeatedly emphasizing her mental clarity and independence from outside influence. This is remarkable, Margaret said as the video concluded. I've never seen stronger evidence of testamentary capacity in a disputed will case. Combined with the physical evidence and witness statements, I believe we have an extremely strong foundation for our challenge. Whitmore nodded with satisfaction. Queen Victoria was quite thorough in her preparations. She understood that challenging royal tradition would require extraordinary evidence. Catherine was still processing the emotional impact of seeing her grandmother again, hearing her voice and witnessing her determination to ensure the jewelry collection's proper stewardship. What's our next step? Margaret consulted her notes. We need to file the challenge immediately given what you've told me about Queen Camilla's renovation timeline. I can have the necessary paperwork prepared by tomorrow and filed by the end of the week. And then? Then we prepare for war, Margaret replied grimly. The moment we file this challenge, it becomes public record. Every media outlet in the world will be covering the story, and every aspect of your family's relationships will be subjected to intense scrutiny. Catherine stood and walked to the window overlooking the ancient courtyard of Lincoln's Inn. Generations of Britain's most distinguished lawyers had walked these same stones, handling cases that shaped the nation's legal and social development. Now she was about to add her own chapter to that history. There's something else we need to discuss, she said, turning back to face Whitmore and Margaret. I received a call this morning from my private secretary. Apparently, Palace Security has been making inquiries about Mr. Whitmore, supposedly investigating him as a potential fraud. Whitmore's expression darkened. That's troubling but not unexpected. Queen Camilla must suspect something. though I'm not sure how much she knows about the specific contents of the secret will. Margaret was already making notes. This actually works in our favor. If Palace Security investigates Mr. Whitmore, they'll quickly discover that he is exactly who he claims to be, with an impeccable reputation and decades of experience handling sensitive matters for prominent families. Their investigation will validate rather than undermine his credibility. But it also means our timeline has accelerated even further, Catherine pointed out. Once they confirm that Whitmore is legitimate, they'll start asking why he contacted me and what documents he might have shared, which is why we filed the challenge today rather than tomorrow, Margaret decided. I'll return to my office immediately and prepare the necessary paperwork. We can have everything filed with the court before Palace Security completes their investigation. Catherine felt a mixture of terror and excitement as the reality of their situation crystallized. In a matter of hours, she would officially challenge the validity of her grandmother's probated will, setting in motion a legal process that would dominate headlines for months to come. Before we proceed, Whitmore said carefully, I need to ask you one final time, Your Royal Highness, are you absolutely certain you want to pursue this course of action? Once we file the challenge, there's no going back. Your family relationships will never be the same, regardless of the outcome. Catherine thought about the video they had just watched, about her grandmother's determined voice explaining her reasoning for the secret will. She thought about the jewelry pieces that were about to be permanently altered, their historical integrity sacrificed for contemporary fashion. Most importantly, she thought about her responsibility as the person her grandmother had trusted to preserve something irreplaceable. I'm certain, she said firmly. File the challenge. The rest of the day passed in a blur of legal preparations and strategic planning. Margaret worked with unprecedented speed to prepare the challenge documents, while Whitmore organized the evidence that would support their case. Catherine returned to the palace to handle her normal duties while mentally preparing for the storm that would inevitably follow. That evening, she called Princess Anne to inform her of their decision to move forward. Anne's response was immediate support mixed with practical concern. I'm proud of you for honoring Mother's wishes, Anne said. But I need to warn you about something. Charles received a call from Camilla this afternoon. She's convinced that this Whitmore fellow is part of some elaborate confidence scheme, and she's pressuring Charles to have him arrested for fraud. Catherine felt a chill of concern. Can they do that? Not legally, not without evidence of actual wrongdoing, but they could make his life very difficult while they investigate, and that might complicate your legal strategy. We're filing the challenge tomorrow morning. Once it's on public record, Palace Security will have to tread much more carefully. Good, Catherine. There's something else. I think you should prepare yourself for Camilla's reaction when she learns about the challenge. She's become very attached to her role as guardian of the jewelry collection, and she's made several public statements about her plans to modernize royal style. Having those statements contradicted by a secret will is going to be deeply embarrassing. After ending the call with Anne, Catherine spent the evening writing in her private journal, trying to capture her thoughts and feelings before her life changed forever. She wrote about her grandmother's love and trust, about the weight of preserving history for future generations, and about her determination to honor the woman who had shaped her understanding of duty and service. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, as if the weather was reflecting the momentous nature of the day's events. Catherine dressed carefully in a navy blue suit that conveyed both respectability and determination, then made her way to Margaret's office where the final preparations were being completed.
Everything is ready, Margaret announced as Catherine arrived.
The challenge has been prepared, the evidence organized, and the supporting documentation compiled. Are you ready to make history? Catherine thought about Queen Charlotte's ring on her finger, about her grandmother's voice on the video recording, about centuries of royal women who had faced their own impossible decisions with grace and courage. She was ready. At precisely 10 o'clock that morning, Lady Margaret Thornbury walked into the Chancery Division of the Royal Courts of Justice and filed the most unprecedented legal challenge in modern royal history. The document she submitted was simple in its language, but revolutionary in its implications. Her Royal Highness Princess Catherine Ashworth Manning hereby challenges the validity of specific provisions of the last will and testament of Her late Majesty Queen Victoria Ashworth, specifically those provisions relating to the disposition of Her late Majesty's personal jewelry collection, and presents evidence that said provisions conflict with the deceased's true final wishes as expressed in a subsequent testamentary document. By noon, the first news reports were beginning to appear. By evening, the story would dominate headlines around the world. The quiet period of royal mourning was officially over, and the most dramatic legal battle in modern royal history had begun. Catherine spent that afternoon in her private study, fielding calls from family members and trying to prepare herself for the media storm that was already beginning to build. Her phone rang constantly, reporters seeking comments, family members demanding explanations, palace officials trying to coordinate responses. But through it all, she kept thinking about her grandmother's words from the video. These jewels tell the story of the remarkable women who came before us, and they deserve to be cared for by someone who honors that legacy. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of proving herself worthy of that trust. Tonight, she would prepare for the battle that would define the rest of her life. The media storm that followed the filing of Catherine's legal challenge exceeded even Margaret's worst predictions. Within hours of the court documents becoming public record, every major news outlet in the world was running variations of the same explosive headline: Secret Royal will challenges Queen's inheritance. Princess Catherine claims jewelry collection rightfully hers. Catherine woke on the second morning after filing to find hundreds of reporters camped outside the palace gates, their cameras trained on every entrance and exit. Her private secretary had fielded over 200 interview requests before 9 o'clock, while her official social media accounts had gained millions of new followers overnight, most of them seeking any hint about her side of the story. The family dynamics had shifted overnight as well. Charles, caught between his role as king and his knowledge of his mother's true wishes, had released a carefully worded statement expressing confidence in the legal system's ability to resolve the matter fairly. Anne had been more direct, publicly stating her support for Catherine's decision to honor their mother's documented wishes. Andrew and Edward had remained diplomatically silent, though palace insiders reported intense private discussions among the siblings. But it was Queen Camilla's response that dominated the headlines and set the tone for what promised to be a brutal public battle. Catherine was having her morning tea when her private secretary brought in the newspapers, his expression grave. The front page of the Times carried a full-color photograph of Camilla wearing the diamond peru at a recent state function, with the headline, "My Sacred Duty to the Crown Jewels." The accompanying article quoted an official statement from the Queen Consort's office that was both dignified and devastating in its implications. Her Majesty Queen Camilla is deeply saddened by the attempt to question the late Queen Victoria's carefully considered final wishes. As the lawful inheritor of the royal jewelry collection, Her Majesty views her role as guardian of these national treasures as a sacred duty to the Crown and the British people. She has consulted with leading legal experts, who have assured her that the challenge to the properly probated will has no legal merit and represents an unfortunate attempt to exploit the family's grief for personal gain. The statement went on to emphasize Camilla's plans to ensure the jewelry collection remained accessible to the public through museum exhibitions and state functions, subtly implying that Catherine's claim was motivated by personal greed rather than genuine concern for the piece's preservation. Catherine set down the newspaper with trembling hands, feeling the full impact of having her motives publicly questioned by someone she had considered family. The suggestion that she was exploiting grief for personal gain was particularly painful, given that her decision had been motivated entirely by her desire to honor her grandmother's wishes and preserve the collection's historical integrity. Her phone rang almost immediately. Margaret's voice was crisp and professional, but Catherine could hear the underlying tension. "Have you seen the morning coverage?"
Unfortunately, yes.
"How bad is it from a legal perspective?" "Mixed. Camilla's statement is well crafted from a public relations standpoint, but it also reveals her strategy. She's going to argue that your grandmother's mental state in her final months made her susceptible to outside influence, and that the secret will represents manipulation rather than genuine intent." Catherine felt a surge of anger at the implication that her grandmother had been manipulated. Anyone who had spent time with Queen Victoria in her final months would have testified to her mental sharpness and fierce independence. "What's our response?" "We don't respond through the media," Margaret replied firmly. "We let our evidence speak in court." "But Catherine, I need to warn you. This is going to get much more personal and much more brutal than what we've seen so far. Camilla's legal team is clearly prepared to challenge not just the document's validity, but your relationship with your grandmother and your motives for pursuing the claim." The reality of what she had set in motion was becoming clearer with each passing hour. This wasn't simply a legal dispute about inheritance. It had become a public battle for the narrative of royal family relationships, with her grandmother's memory caught in the middle. Catherine's morning schedule had been cleared to allow for an emergency meeting with her own communications team, led by Sarah Morrison, a formidable former BBC journalist who had managed royal media relations for over a decade. Sarah's approach was typically direct. "Your Royal Highness, we need to discuss your public response to Queen Camilla's statement. The narrative is being shaped without your input, and that's dangerous." Margaret advised against media engagement. Margaret is thinking like a lawyer, which is appropriate. But this battle will be won or lost in the court of public opinion as much as in the legal system. We need to establish your side of the story before Camilla's version becomes accepted truth. Catherine was torn between her instinct to remain dignified and silent and her growing realization that her grandmother's reputation was being damaged by the implications of Camilla's response. What would you recommend? Sarah consulted her notes. A carefully crafted statement that emphasizes your respect for your grandmother's documented wishes, your commitment to preserving the historical significance of the jewelry collection, and your sadness that the matter couldn't be resolved privately within the family. We focus on duty and preservation, not personal gain. Before Catherine could respond, her private secretary appeared in the doorway again, this time looking genuinely distressed. Your Royal Highness, I have King Charles's private secretary on the line. His Majesty would like to see you immediately. The walk to Charles' private study felt longer than usual, each step echoing Catherine's growing apprehension about the conversation ahead. When she arrived, she found Charles looking older than she had ever seen him, the weight of trying to balance his roles as king, husband, and son clearly taking its toll. Catherine, he said, not bothering with formal protocol. We need to discuss what's happening and where it's leading. I understand your difficult position, Uncle Charles. Do you? His voice carried a sharpness she had never heard before. Because from where I'm sitting, it appears that you've decided to wage a public war against my wife, using my mother's memory as ammunition. Catherine felt as if she had been physically struck. That's not what this is about, and you know it. I'm trying to honor grandmother's documented wishes. Her documented wishes as presented by a man none of us had heard of until a week ago, supported by a secret document that conveniently appeared after 3 months of silence.
Charles began pacing behind his desk, his agitation obvious. Catherine, how does this look to the public?
How does it look that the king's niece is publicly challenging his wife's inheritance based on mysterious evidence that was kept hidden during the official probate process? It looks like someone is finally standing up for what grandmother really wanted, instead of what was convenient for the crown's lawyers. Charles stopped pacing and stared at her directly. Is that really what you believe? That we all conspired to ignore mother's wishes for the sake of convenience? Catherine felt her own anger rising. I believe that grandmother tried repeatedly to change the official will and was told by palace lawyers that tradition required the jewelry to go to Camilla. I believe she was frustrated enough to create a separate document ensuring her true wishes would be honored. And I believe that everyone who knew about it chose to keep quiet rather than deal with the complications. Even if all of that were true, did it occur to you that perhaps there were good reasons for those choices? That perhaps the stability of the monarchy might be more important than any individual's personal preferences about jewelry? The question hung in the air between them, representing the fundamental tension at the heart of their conflict. Charles was asking her to weigh her grandmother's personal wishes against the larger institutional interests of the crown, while Catherine believed that honoring those wishes was precisely what the crown should stand for. Grandmother didn't see them as conflicting interests, Catherine replied quietly. She believed that preserving the collection's historical integrity was essential to the crown's legitimacy. She was worried about pieces being modified or sold, about their connections to royal history being lost. Charles's expression softened slightly. Catherine, I understand your concerns about Camilla's renovation plans, but surely we could have addressed those issues privately, within the family, without subjecting the monarchy to this kind of public scrutiny. Could we have? Because from what I understand, Camilla had already scheduled meetings with jewelers and was planning to begin the modifications next month. How exactly would private family discussions have stopped that process? Before Charles could respond, there was a discreet knock at the door. Queen Camilla entered without waiting for permission, her expression a carefully controlled mixture of hurt and determination. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said, though her tone suggested she didn't particularly care if she was. But I felt it was important for the three of us to have this conversation together. Catherine's heart began racing as she realized this was likely to be one of the most difficult conversations of her life. The woman she was challenging in court was about to confront her directly, with Charles caught uncomfortably between them. Camilla, Charles began, perhaps this isn't the best time. Actually, Charles, I think this is exactly the right time. Camilla's voice was steady but carried an edge Catherine had never heard before. Catherine, I need to understand something. Do you genuinely believe that your grandmother would have wanted to put the family through this kind of public humiliation? Do you think she would have wanted her final months to be subjected to the kind of speculation and analysis that your legal challenge has unleashed? Catherine met Camilla's gaze directly. I think grandmother cared more about preserving the jewelry collection's historical significance than about avoiding temporary embarrassment. And I think she trusted me to have the courage to honor her wishes, even when it was difficult. Her wishes, Camilla repeated, according to a document that none of us saw during the months of legal proceedings that followed her death. A document that conveniently appeared just as I was beginning to make these pieces more accessible to the public through museum loans and modernized settings. The timing wasn't convenient, it was planned. Grandmother specifically instructed Mr. Whitmore to wait 3 months before presenting the document to allow for the official transition and avoid complications during the immediate succession period. Camilla's composure cracked slightly. Catherine, these pieces aren't just jewelry. They're symbols of the monarchy's continuity. When I wear them at state functions, I'm representing centuries of royal tradition. The idea that they should be handed over to someone who will keep them locked away in private vaults seems contrary to everything the crown should stand for. But I wouldn't keep them locked away, Catherine protested. I understand their public significance, but I also understand their historical value, which is why I can't stand by and watch them be permanently altered to suit contemporary fashion. Altered? Camilla's voice rose slightly. I'm working with the same royal jewelers who have maintained these pieces for generations. Every modification would be done with complete respect for their historical significance, including breaking apart the diamond parure and separating the sapphire suite into individual pieces. Camilla's silence confirmed that Catherine's information about the planned modifications was accurate. Charles looked between the two women, clearly struggling with his own conflicted feelings about his wife's renovation plans. The pieces need to be relevant to modern royal duties, Camilla said finally. Some of those Victorian settings are so elaborate that they overshadow the occasions where they're worn. Making them more wearable actually honors their purpose. Their purpose is to connect us to the women who wore them before us, Catherine replied. Every time those pieces have been worn, they've told the story of royal feminine power across centuries. Altering them breaks that connection permanently. The conversation continued for another hour, with positions becoming more entrenched rather than more flexible. By the end, Catherine realized that the gulf between her understanding of the collection's significance and Camilla's was unbridgeable. More troubling, Charles seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the implications of supporting either position fully. As Catherine prepared to leave, Camilla made one final appeal. Catherine, is there any way we can resolve this privately? Perhaps if you withdrew the legal challenge, we could work together on decisions about the collection's future. You could have input into any modifications, serve as a sort of historical advisor. Catherine was tempted by the offer. It would end the media scrutiny and family conflict while giving her some influence over the collection's treatment. But she also knew it would mean abandoning her grandmother's explicit wishes in favor of a compromise that satisfied no one completely. I appreciate the offer, she said carefully, but I can't withdraw a challenge that's based on legal documents my grandmother specifically created. I have a responsibility to see this through. Camilla's expression hardened. Then I hope you're prepared for the consequences. This legal challenge will be fought with every resource at the Crown's disposal, and I will not allow your grandmother's memory to be used to justify what amounts to theft of royal property. The word theft hung in the air as Catherine left Charles's study, marking the point where family disagreement had transformed into open warfare. As she walked back to her own apartments, she realized that there would be no easy resolution to the conflict she had initiated. The legal battle ahead would be brutal, public, and potentially destructive to relationships she had treasured her entire life. But as she passed a portrait of her grandmother in the corridor, Catherine reminded herself why she had chosen this path. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the cost seemed overwhelming. The jewelry collection represented more than personal inheritance. It embodied centuries of feminine strength, wisdom, and resilience that deserved to be preserved unchanged for future generations. That evening, Catherine released her own statement through Sarah Morrison, carefully crafted to establish her position without escalating the personal conflict further. Her Royal Highness Princess Catherine is deeply committed to honoring the documented wishes of her beloved grandmother, Queen Victoria. The legal challenge filed this week is based on substantial evidence of the late Queen's true intentions regarding her personal jewelry collection. Princess Catherine's sole motivation is ensuring that these historically significant pieces are preserved and protected in accordance with Queen Victoria's explicit instructions. She remains hopeful that this matter can be resolved in a way that honors both the law and the memory of a remarkable woman who devoted her life to serving the British people. The statement was dignified, factual, and utterly insufficient to calm the storm that was building around the royal family. As Catherine prepared for bed that night, she knew that the real battle was just beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, and new tests of her determination to honor her grandmother's trust. The only certainty was that nothing would ever be the same again. 3 weeks after filing the legal challenge, Catherine found herself in the unprecedented position of being a royal family member actively at war with the crown's legal establishment. The case had consumed every aspect of her life, transforming her from a beloved princess known for her charity work into a controversial figure whose every move was analyzed by legal experts and royal correspondents around the world. The morning of the preliminary hearing dawned cold and crisp, with autumn leaves swirling around the entrance to the Royal Courts of Justice. As Catherine arrived with Margaret and their expanded legal team, the media presence was overwhelming. Photographers lined the street, television crews broadcast live from the courthouse steps, and dozens of reporters shouted questions that Catherine had been instructed to ignore. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was charged with historical significance. Never before had the validity of a royal will been challenged in open court, and everyone present understood they were witnessing a moment that would be studied by legal scholars for generations to come. The Honorable Mr. Purpose, Justice Thornfield, one of Britain's most respected judges specializing in probate law, presided over the proceedings with the gravity appropriate to the case's unprecedented nature. His reputation for fairness and meticulous attention to legal precedent had made him the obvious choice to handle such a sensitive matter. Catherine sat in the gallery with Margaret, watching as teams of Britain's most distinguished lawyers presented arguments that would determine the fate of her grandmother's jewelry collection. The Crown was represented by Sir James Whitehall QC, whose impressive career had included defending the monarchy's interests in numerous high-profile cases. His opening statement was a masterful blend of legal precision and emotional appeal. "Your Lordship," Sir James began, his voice carrying the authority of decades of courtroom experience, "this case represents nothing less than an attempt to undermine the stability of our constitutional monarchy through the exploitation of an elderly woman's declining faculties. The probated will of Her Late Majesty Queen Victoria was prepared with the assistance of the Crown's most experienced legal counsel, witnessed by appropriate parties, and filed according to established procedures that have governed royal succession for centuries." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle before continuing. "The document now being presented as superseding that official will was created in secret, without the knowledge of family members or legal advisors, by a woman whose age and failing health had made her increasingly vulnerable to outside influence. We will demonstrate that this so-called secret will represents not the Queen's genuine intentions, but rather the successful manipulation of a grieving grandmother's affections." Catherine felt each word as a personal attack, not just on her claim but on her relationship with her grandmother. The suggestion that Queen Victoria had been manipulated struck her as deeply offensive to the memory of one of the strongest, most independent women she had ever known. Margaret's response, when her turn came, was equally compelling but took a fundamentally different approach. Rather than focusing on institutional stability, she emphasized the human element of the case. A grandmother's love and her determination to ensure her most precious possessions went to someone who would truly value them. "Your Lordship, this case is not about undermining royal tradition or exploiting anyone's vulnerability. It is about honoring the documented final wishes of a remarkable woman who spent her final months carefully crafting a plan to ensure her jewelry collection would be preserved and protected by someone who understood its true significance." Margaret gestured toward the evidence table where Whitmore's files were meticulously organized. "The evidence we will present demonstrates beyond any reasonable doubt that Queen Victoria was mentally acute, legally informed, and completely independent in her decision to create the contested document. Far from being manipulated, she was the architect of an elaborate plan to circumvent institutional pressure that she felt was preventing her from disposing of her personal property according to her genuine wishes." The preliminary hearing continued for 2 days, with both sides presenting evidence about the Queen's mental state, the circumstances surrounding both wills, and the legal requirements for testamentary validity. Catherine found herself reliving her grandmother's final months through the testimony of doctors, staff members, and family members who had interacted with the Queen during the relevant period. Dr. Elizabeth Harrington, the Queen's personal physician for over 15 years, provided perhaps the most crucial testimony. Under oath, she confirmed that Queen Victoria had remained mentally sharp and emotionally stable throughout her final year, despite her obvious physical decline. "Her late Majesty was one of the most intellectually engaged patients I have ever treated," Dr. Harrington testified. "Even in her final weeks, she was reading extensively, following political developments, and engaging in complex discussions about family and state matters. I would have had no hesitation in certifying her mental capacity for any legal document she chose to create." But Sir James's cross-examination revealed the complexity of assessing mental capacity in elderly individuals facing their mortality. He pressed Dr. Harrington about the Queen's medications, her emotional state regarding death, and the possibility that grief and physical discomfort might have affected her judgment in ways that weren't immediately obvious. The testimony of Princess Anne proved particularly dramatic, as she was forced to publicly acknowledge her role in facilitating the secret will's creation. Under intense questioning from Sir James, she maintained that her mother had been entirely clear about her intentions and reasoning throughout the process. My mother was frustrated by what she saw as institutional inflexibility regarding her personal property, Anne testified, her voice steady despite the obvious emotional difficulty of the situation. She felt that the Crown's legal advisors were more concerned with precedent than with her actual wishes. The secret will wasn't created impulsively. It was the result of months of careful consideration and planning. Sir James pressed harder. Your Royal Highness, did it not occur to you that this deception might be harmful to family relationships and institutional stability? Anne paused before responding, clearly weighing her words carefully. My mother asked me to trust her judgment, and I did. She believed that honoring her true wishes regarding the jewelry collection was more important than avoiding temporary family discord. The most devastating moment for Catherine's case came when Sir James presented evidence that Queen Camilla had already begun preliminary discussions with museum curators about loaning major pieces from the collection for public exhibitions. He argued that this demonstrated responsible stewardship and commitment to public access, while Catherine's claim would result in the pieces being hoarded in private vaults. Margaret's response was swift and effective. She presented documentation showing that Catherine had actually begun developing her own plans for public access, including partnerships with the National Portrait Gallery and the Victoria and Albert Museum for rotating exhibitions that would emphasize the piece's historical significance rather than their monetary value. But perhaps the most emotionally charged moment came when Edmund Whitmore took the witness stand to defend both his professional conduct and his relationship with Queen Victoria. Sir James's attack was relentless, questioning everything from Whitmore's credentials to his motivations for maintaining secrecy about the document. Mr. Whitmore, Sir James began, isn't it true that you have handled several high-profile inheritance disputes involving elderly clients whose family members later claimed undue influence? Whitmore's response was dignified but firm. I have represented numerous clients facing complex family dynamics regarding inheritance matters. In every case, I have adhered to the highest professional standards and acted solely in my client's best interests. And in those cases, didn't family members sometimes allege that you had manipulated vulnerable elderly individuals for personal gain? Margaret objected to the line of questioning, but the damage was already done. Sir James had planted the suggestion that Whitmore had a pattern of taking advantage of elderly clients, even if no such pattern actually existed. But Whitmore's vindication came when the court viewed the video recordings of his sessions with Queen Victoria. Watching the late Queen methodically explain her reasoning, write key passages of the will in her own hand, and explicitly state her mental clarity and independence was powerfully convincing evidence of her genuine intent. The preliminary hearing concluded with Justice Thornfield announcing that he would issue his ruling on the document's prima facie validity within 1 week. If he found sufficient evidence to support Catherine's claim, the case would proceed to a full trial that would examine every aspect of both wills in exhaustive detail. As Catherine left the courthouse, surrounded by security personnel pushing through the crowd of photographers and reporters, she felt emotionally drained, but cautiously optimistic. The evidence supporting her grandmother's secret will was substantial, and Margaret seemed confident about their chances of proceeding to trial. But the personal cost was becoming increasingly apparent. That evening, she received a call from Prince Edward, her youngest uncle, who had remained diplomatically neutral throughout the proceedings. Catherine, Edward's voice was tired and sad. I need you to understand what this is doing to the family. Charles is barely speaking to Anne. Camilla is talking about stepping back from public duties due to stress, and the media coverage is making all of us look petty and money-grubbing. Catherine felt a familiar stab of guilt. Edward, I'm not doing this for money. I'm trying to honor grandmother's documented wishes. I understand your motivations, and I even admire your commitment to mother's memory. But Catherine, is any inheritance worth tearing the family apart? Is any collection of jewelry worth destroying relationships that took decades to build? The question haunted Catherine throughout the week as she waited for Justice Thornfield's ruling. She found herself questioning not her legal right to pursue the claim, but the wisdom of continuing a battle that was clearly causing enormous pain to people she loved. The answer came when she visited her grandmother's private chapel, a small space within the palace where Queen Victoria had often gone for quiet reflection. Sitting in the same pew where her grandmother had prayed countless times, Catherine felt a sense of clarity about her path forward. Her grandmother hadn't created the secret will lightly or impulsively. She had understood the potential consequences and had chosen to proceed anyway because she believed the jewelry collection's preservation was more important than temporary family harmony. If Catherine abandoned the claim now, she would be choosing short-term peace over long-term responsibility to preserve something irreplaceable. Justice Thornfield's ruling, delivered the following Monday, vindicated Catherine's decision to continue fighting. In a carefully reasoned 30-page judgment, he found that the evidence supporting the secret will's validity was substantial enough to warrant a full trial. While questions remain about the wisdom of creating such a document in secret, the judge wrote, the evidence presented suggests that Queen Victoria possessed both the mental capacity and legal authority to dispose of her personal property according to her genuine wishes. The court finds sufficient grounds to proceed with a full examination of both testamentary documents and their respective claims to validity. The ruling triggered a new wave of media coverage, with legal experts debating the implications for royal succession law and family relationships. But for Catherine, it represented something simpler and more personal. Validation that her grandmother's wishes deserved to be taken seriously, even when they conflicted with institutional convenience. That evening, as she prepared for the months of litigation that lay ahead, Catherine called Margaret with a single question: what do we need to do to win this completely? Margaret's response was immediate. We need to prove not just that your grandmother created the secret will, but that she did so specifically because the official will failed to reflect her true intentions. We need to demonstrate that the jewelry collection means more to you than status or wealth, that you see it as she did, as a sacred trust connecting past and future. As Catherine hung up the phone, she realized that the most important battle still lay ahead. She had won the right to have her claim heard, but now she would have to prove herself worthy of her grandmother's trust in front of the entire world. The preliminary hearing had been about legal technicalities and procedural questions. The trial would be about something far more fundamental: whether love, understanding, and genuine appreciation could triumph over tradition, precedent, and institutional pressure. Catherine was ready for that fight. Her grandmother had trusted her with this responsibility, and she would not let that trust be betrayed, no matter what the personal cost might be.